I wrote a very long thing
Uh-oh.
on MEV. If you're not familiar with MEV, it was short for minor extracted value. Um, and briefly, I'll say that uh, as far as this whole situation goes, all of this is in the hands of what I would call the good guys for now. Right. But anytime you have a situation like this, all it takes is a changing of the guards, right? Binance chain, it works fine until someone at Binance decides that it shouldn't work fine anymore, right? And then they of course have the ability to do that, which is why it's a problem. So
I mean, the
not
issue
saying
is as
any,
well, yeah, I mean, they recently halted the whole Binance blockchain, right? Imagine
yeah.
if your
I
whole
mean, well,
country
it's
runs on
pro.
that. They halted it for
There's an
2
exploit.
days. What if your country runs on that? That's crazy, right?
Yeah, and then this will be the ultimate point of this whole thing is we're in this industry to build decentralized, autonomous global networks, and that this system, right? This financial system that we all share on this planet, even if it's in different segments and under different authorities, the job of this machine is ultimately to feed everybody. That's what it's all about. So if and then we saw, when there's natural disasters, right? Was it what's the name of the place that had a volcano and a tsunami kind of recently? And their financial system was wiped out, but very quickly Bitcoin was able to be deployed
Yeah.
in its stead. Can't remember the name of the place. Anyway, um, not saying that anyone should buy or sell any crypto with this, and I'm not trying to throw some shade on a lot of these participants that ultimately are just following game theory, right? There's not really good options here at the end of it. So MEV, if you're not familiar, if you don't trade DeFi, is anything where there was money left on the table during a DeFi transaction. So this could be just some arbitrage, some markets out of whack, some dexes out of whack. It could be some front running or a sandwich transaction. This is where a user has left too much slippage on their transaction, more than was necessary. So a someone who has a little bit of control of the order of transactions within a block or across several blocks, which is now also an option. But if they can do that, then they can get ahead of your transaction, get that extra slippage out of there. Your transaction will still be valid, and then they've just taken a little bit of money risk free. And really, this is a UX issue, or it was. It was a UX issue under proof of work. And
What you mean by that when you say that is that, to be clear, is that if you designed a way of doing DeFi transactions, if you designed them in such a way that you were able to pre-calculate what the kind of slippage is, then you could just price that in, and the person who is making the order would just they would know exactly what they're going to get beforehand, um and they could place their order, and you wouldn't be seeing a lot of uh like people just making ridiculous amounts of money on it. The issue was that the UX wasn't really pre-designed to calculate what the costs were, the runoff costs associated with these transactions. Correct?
uh, I think if I followed you there, well, the user, the person making the transaction has to specify in advance how much slippage they're going to allow because they have no control over when their transaction will eventually occur.
Yeah.
So there's the slippage in that time could change. So if you want your transaction to go through, you generally allow for a bit higher slippage. And if you put too much in there, someone can come along and take that little bit extra. But the reason I didn't consider this a problem under proof of work, and this was around, we'll get into the exact nature of the situation in a second. But this was around before the merge, and it was actually arguably worse, or maybe even more centralized. But all it really results in
That was
is,
more centralized, but
yeah,
yeah.
I'll get to it. But there's um, mo- I just lost my train of thought there.
All right. I
um,
mean, MEV was more centralized before the merge, but it wasn't so important because the pools were the ones building the blocks. And
uh,
they were also the ones validating the blocks and relaying the blocks, etc. And so they would be handed MEV opportunities. And if you could pull up that diagram, that'd be great,
well,
Jacob.
the results of this is that it was gas issues, and some people would pay more. It's the
Okay.
next image. That's the one he's talking about. But
Or
and
I was
I'll
talking
get
about
to
the diagram with users, searchers, builders. Um,
yeah. You're skipping a little bit ahead of me though. The UX problem here under proof of work is that it's kind of a soft censorship was maybe the only thing that you could complain about. And that being that some people might pay more for transactions than others. If your transaction didn't have any MEV in it, or if you were broadcasting only to the mempool or using something that prevented MEV from occurring on your transaction, basically you're forcing that DeFi transaction through with the money on the table that you're leaving all the way through. So what happens here is MEV kind of becomes a somewhat substitute for gas. If you've got a high slippage on your transaction's worth more to the miners, worth more to the validators, so you can get it processed at a lower gas fee, even though you're effectively paying the same thing. So like at the end of the day, if you have to pay more for gas because you don't want to be MEV'd, you're still paying the same as the guy who got the MEV, because it's just where did you get it taken from, your transaction or your gas?
Just one side or
So
the other, yeah.
yeah.
but
So
so
yeah, go ahead.
with under proof of work, the thing was because the pools were making the blocks, they would get the MEV transaction from the searcher, but then they would include those in the beginning of the block, but then they wanted to fill up that block, so they would fill it with transactions from the mempool, and those would be they got paid for those, that they were happy with that. They always tried to make those blocks as full as possible. Now with the current situation, because the block builder is often working directly with the searcher and the relayer, and is no longer
We need to define all these terms. We've not told anybody what any of these things are yet.
yeah,
Um,
definitely a
if
good
we could scroll to that briefly, if you could,
yeah, that's why I wanted
Jacob,
to go
the
there
diagram,
to
yeah.
begin
There
with.
you
But
go.
also, we need to define each of these people and what they do. So,
Yeah.
the searcher is a person who is looking for MEV opportunities on the blockchain, and of course, we've described sandwiching, and calling liquidations is another known one. But really, the opportunities are infinite. It's infinite as DeFi itself. New DeFi creates new opportunities for MEV, and you need someone to go find those. The person is called the searcher. They assemble the transactions with their addresses, so they're the ones that are going to get paid for all the MEV. They get 100% of the MEV. And then upstream from here, they pay out their other parties in gas. They leave gas on the table for the block builder, who is someone they pass their transactions to. The builder then fills the rest of the block with mempool transactions if it's not full. The block builder then passes it to the relay. And the relay was a solution. This builder proposer separation came a little bit later. The relay by Flashbots, they've got the major relay, and no shade on them. They are making the best of a terrible situation.
To be clear, under the old proof of work model, the builder, relay, and validator were all one, and that was the pool.
No, there was a relay. The thing is that the builder was on the other side of the relay. There was a relay from the searchers to the builder, who was the pool, and then the pool essentially functioned as a relay to the miners themselves, who were only hashing headers, right? If you were a miner, you only hash headers. And so this model was kind of an attempt to restore a little bit of balance, but I'll get into that in a second. The relay under proof of work was set up to ensure that all of the mining pools had access to all of the MEV transactions, because what was happening was searchers would only submit to the biggest pools, because if you're a searcher and your MEV transaction doesn't get included in the block, you didn't make anything. Right? So you need to send it to the biggest pool, or as many pools as you can. And the relay it actually kind of fixed that for what it's worth. And it brought the gas down. It did make things a little more fair, even though at one point you did have 90% of the MEV transactions going through this relay, which is much higher than it is now. But as we've already kind of gone over, it wasn't really an issue, because in the end, under proof of work, mining pools are kind of disposable. They're trivial. Not to throw shade on the mining pools, brains, or anybody. Running anything at scale is a big job. I'm sure it takes a whole lot of work, but as far as spinning up a mining pool goes, if there was an issue at one of the big mining pools and you want to spin one up, or somebody else spins one up and you want to switch over to it, there is no friction to do that. It is really trivial. And this is ultimately what makes this such a big deal.
And I mean, consider the difficulty of spinning up a mining pool versus actually running a huge mining center, 1+% of the network. Spinning up a mining pool is way easier than running 1% of the mining network.
Literally forging physical chips and machines. If you want to try and get into that, right? So, when we go to proof of stake, or at least this was also pre-merge. This builder proposal separation is almost a year old. And this was made under the concern that validators would operate censorship markets. And censorship markets in the context of MEV would mean, for instance, I mean, they could take a lot of forms, but an easy example is two searchers vying for the same opportunity, both having equal footing on all other respects. One of them decides to pay the validator to not include the other transaction. To maybe prevent that a little bit, or try to make it a little bit more fair, this builder proposer model, where the builder goes on the other side of the relay, was supposed to help solve that, mitigate that a little bit. And for what it's worth, it does. The validator is no longer realistically able to operate a censorship market, since they're now just signing off on headers. The problem is that now the relay gets to do that. Now the relay is the one who gets to operate the censorship markets. And there are far fewer relays than there are validators. Starting a relay requires more technical expertise than running a regular Ethereum node, which is already pretty difficult. And then we've basically, because the validators themselves, right? So these are the pools now. They're not maybe individual holders. So they're in a competition for the yield, right? They have to offer the highest yield in the game, or they're going to lose stakers to another pool. This is assuming that the staking ETH is liquid and you can unstake it, right? That's not presently the case, but we'll just be charitable and assume that that comes along very soon. Even then, there will be a unstaking period. All staking systems need an unstaking period, otherwise you can't enforce slashing. So if you have slashing, you have an unlock period. The unlock period needs to be as long as reasonably possible in order to make sure you can't abuse the slashing mechanism, right? It's got to be an enforceable slashing mechanism for a long distance attack. You also don't want to inconvenience people. I see 21 days a lot. Who knows if that's what it'll be. But what you need to compare now is if a mining pool who is in the same sort of setup, right? Mining pool has to compete for yield. They want to offer as much as they can to the people, the miners on their pool, so they can attract more people. But if they ever begin to misbehave, they're gone, right? They're gone. Everybody's going to switch. You can flood out of there in a heartbeat, and it takes nothing. And under this system, you're going to have at least a 21-day window where you're off. That's what you need to compare it to. Now, you as a home miner or even a large industrial miner, if a mining pool starts censoring some people, right? Some people, but they're still offering a lot of money. You really care? For 21 days, you're going to off for almost a whole month just for these people? Maybe, but you gotta maybe be in the same boat as everyone else, because if you choose to leave, right, but nobody else does, now you're losing market share, right? Because you're not at the best pool. You need to
Correct.
be at the
Yeah.
best pool, or you're losing market share in
And
this
if you're losing
inflationary
market
environment.
share in proof of stake, because it's inherently centralizing, if you're not making as much as the next person, then you're losing the amount that you're staking. You're losing control of the network, and eventually the entire network goes over to whoever makes the most. And if they're making the most using through censorship, and that doesn't matter if they are paying, like, literally that could be money that hell, there could be some outside agency that just wants to censor this, pays a little bit of a little bit extra to anyone who's censoring, says, hey, I'll pay an extra, $5 or something, as long as you never to anybody who never processes a censored transaction. Well, now all of a sudden nobody wants to ever touch them.
Yep.
Yeah, and let's go up to like, hey, Binance, how much to publish empty blocks only? All right, what's your price tag for that? Because all you got to do is compete. I know your price tag actually, because all you got to do is compete with the next best pool.
Yeah.
So
Crazy. Yeah.
yeah, and that's where we're at. And if you want to, Jacob, if you scroll up to the top or second to top image, the mevwatch.info. We didn't really have mevwatch before the merge because it didn't really matter. Now it matters a lot. And this is yesterday's graphic. I haven't looked today. It was at 64% OFAC compliance. The critical threshold for proof of stake on Ethereum is 66%. So in 2 more percent, there's a realistic chance that the large validators, the validators who are also the large economic nodes, if you recall, the economic nodes during the block size war had a big role to play. But ultimately, they were important, but they weren't the end of the discussion, right? Because there's also the miners that have their own separate interests from the large economic nodes. And what we have here is a situation where the big exchanges, Coinbase, FTX, Binance, etc., would be the largest mining farms. So imagine Bitcoin, where the exchanges not only have all the liquidity, but also all the hardware. And what kind of environment is that? Do you care if they run a pool?
In the
Do you
end,
care if they use somebody else's pool? Like,
the exchanges already have compliancy stuff in place, right? They have to KYC
yeah,
everybody. So in the end, what it drums down to is it's a huge attack on decentralization. And in the end, I think if you really want to know the core values of it, I've posted the link to Phil's full write up on this in the chat, because this is something that's really valuable to us, that really goes deep for us, decentralization wise, But yeah, I mean, if you hear Phil talk about it, it's just not even a little bit of it.
So the thing I was saying here with the 66%, right? If somebody went to one of these to an exchange and said, you're a large economic node, you hold a lot of Bitcoin, your node is not allowed to build off of a censored transaction anymore. What happens there is they're essentially kicked off the network, right? They can't use Bitcoin if they don't include all of the blocks that consensus dictates that they should include. And they have no power to do anything about it. Even if a large entity went to all the big exchanges and said, all you big economic nodes, stop building off of, stop accepting blocks that have censored transactions in them, they don't have any hash power. They've got nothing after that. Even if they have all the money, the hard fork away from them would have all the hash power and be the secure one. That's not the case here. Once this hits 66%, if somebody wants to tell them stop building off of blocks with censored transactions in them, they can hard fork the network, and then there are no more, no more free transactions. And I'm sure the community would be in an outrage, right? This has been proposed, right? This has been thought about. Well, we'd hard fork and kick them off the network. And I would say, with what Ethereum?
Yeah,
because you with proof of work, you have this hash power that you can wrestle that back from them. But now they've got you're gonna hard fork and copy paste everybody onto a new network. What if they choose not to run it? They don't have any choice if they're going to run it under proof of work.
Forking, this is the most ridiculous argument to me, because when you say you're hard forking and cutting those people out, you're cutting out everybody who's
the
got
liquidity.
You're cutting out everybody who's got their money on any exchange.
Yeah.
You're stealing. You're not stealing or destroying value from some evil boogeyman, centralized, horrible person, because that exchange doesn't really own that crypto. They just have it because people are lazy.
And there's basically nothing you can do at this point. I'm sorry. The moral of the story.
Extra fun because of the inability to unstake your ETH right now, which means that nobody could even move their Ethereum. The actual Ethereum cannot be moved. So like, what exactly? They would just be destroying anybody's ETH, that anybody who owns all
even
the
if they copied it over onto, and let's say they fork that in when they do the hard fork away from these misbehaving people. They're forking away from all the liquidity and economic power, which means they're starting from scratch. And at least under proof of work, one of the two parties, either the liquidity or the security, has to start from scratch, and nobody wants to do that, so everybody works together. But there's not really any incentive to do that anymore, other than good looks. And there's no way out too. This conversation is actually isn't that new. I was reading, there's people raising my exact concerns. on the Ethereum research forums, and the
Mm-hmm.
response from Vitalik was actually like, "Well, do you have a better answer?"
Yeah.
That's
And like,
terrible.
no, there's no
terrible.
better answer. The answer
I mean,
is that you
it's
shouldn't
never
have
a
gone
good
to proof of
situation.
stake.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
proof
mean,
of
it's never a
stake
good
was
situation
it
to
was a
provide.
mistake.
Yeah, it's never a good situation to provide a problem and not a solution or an answer to it. So, like, when you present something like that to someone in his position, and it's like, well, you got anything better? And you're like, nope. It's like, okay, it just gets swept under the rug, unfortunately, because if you're not coming with even a possible option, like, hey, let's go this route type of deal. No, I agree. I think the proof of stake avenue, unfortunately, is slowly catching up, and I think it's unraveling. And based off of your
Yeah.
conversations too,
It-
and everything's
it was-
unraveling now to go, oh crap. And it's really a shame when I started to read through the article and kind of thinking through the current state of Ethereum. It's a real shame because as much as like some of us have that instinct to be like, screw it, let it burn type of deal, others of us, you also have to think from an outside perspective looking in, you kind of need it to succeed. Like that's kind of how we were, especially with when Ethereum went from proof of work to proof of stake. It was like, okay, we really don't need this to be a fumble. Like we don't need this to be a cluster, and we really just need it to succeed, because from outside money looking at crypto overall, from institutional money, like showing success is okay, great. There's some reassurances there. In this situation here, it's like there is no backpedaling with Ethereum. Like there's no, hey, we're going to take a step backwards. So the challenge is like, you really can't, after all of this, be like, and Vitalik would not be like, all right, let's pivot back. It's like, it's not a thing. Like you can't do that.
Spend another 6 years going back to proof of work.
You have to forge forward. The downside is like you're losing faith, you're losing value. I mean, look at the value of Ethereum. It's just institutional money coming back into it. It's like, man, do people want to touch this? And I've heard plenty of people that are like, oh, well, I'm holding tight on my Ethereum because I do think it's going to go back up. What is Ethereum going to do to trigger a value spike? Because right now, everything they do just causes it to go down even more. But this also is a phenomenal example. This is like your textbook example that we will talk about years down the road of like, don't do this because of this. It's going to have like an amazing case study around this down the road. It's going to be like, don't touch for mistake.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. Something that makes me a bit sad about this situation is that there isn't a real, there's no coin that has any decent real like Ethereum devs. And there are plenty of Ethereum devs and developers around Ethereum who saw this coming, who were against it, but they haven't kind of been able to band together or do anything together, and so there's no kind of alternative coin. There's
You call it a climate denier. If you're against proof of stake, you're a climate denier, Rufus. There can't be any other reason. Anti-intellectualism at its finest.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to have been what happened. I mean, we got two forks of Ethereum, but they were both jokes. They're started in China. They don't have any dev support. They don't have a clear path. They don't have a clear community. We need to. I would really like to see some sort of coin start that is a serious, all right, this is an alternative route, this is another way to do it.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right about all these Ethereum for like either ETH projects that have come to light. I mean, even this past week, like this pink chain that all of a sudden just kind of came, all of a sudden it's like the hype right now. It's like, everyone's kind of jumping on it, but you're right. We have all these like little tiny projects that really don't have developers behind it. They're just kind of holding up that algorithm, and that's really it. So yeah, you do need something with some backing and value to it, especially promising for projects as well.
I think there's Ethereum Classic, but Ethereum Classic is held back by its own drama and its own set of people. Like a huge thing that's going to hold back any of them is that they need to fork the algo, because if you're going to get buy-in, if you're going to get people into your project, you're gonna need to like every project, Bitcoin, Ethereum. I guess those are the two big ones. But Monero, I would argue as well. All of these coins that have really kind of seen some good adoption and good development started with GPU mining. And the developers, all the developers they attracted came to them got introduced to the coin through GPU mining. And if you don't make a coin, if you don't start your coin being GPU mineable, you're not going to be able to build that community, that interest.
The grassroots side of it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's what made Monero, and that's what made Ethereum, and that's what made
Doge.
Bitcoin, right? The fact that everybody could start out with nothing and in the end have something. And I think the difference is as well, obviously we have a couple of proof of stake coins already. We have delegated proof of stake coins as well. Obviously those coins get made and you get a trade-off, right? You get a trade-off for you get centralization, but the coins are cheaper to transact or something like that. But the issue was with Ethereum, nothing changed except for they just flipped over to proof of stake and
they didn't
just
even make it more
centralized
efficient.
everything. They
Yeah,
didn't
that's the best
like pimp it out. They didn't like make it cheaper for anyone to use or whatever. They just basically
no improvement.
no
Yeah.
improvement, just
great
99% more centralization. And yeah.
Is now you mentioned DPoS, delegated proof of stake systems, in my opinion, are now more secure. Matic is now more secure than Ethereum.
Yeah,
And
if you have
go back to
100
the,
validators that are voted for, is more secure right now than Ethereum.
because you
itself.
can guarantee, and that's not really guarantee because somebody could, have a lot of Matic and vote themselves multiple validator slots. They could pretend to be different people when they're the same person and operate multiple validator slots, but it's way harder. That is so much harder to do than simply just gathering the coins and now you're in charge.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.